Hi everyone, it's Connie. I'm here to share a crazy health story with you today that I know has the potential to help a lot of people and save lives. So if you've been struggling with anxiety, depression, neurological issues, chronic fatigue, brain fog, or other unexplainable symptoms, you are most likely heavy metal toxic. Yes, I mean toxic heavy metals such as mercury, lead, arsenic, aluminum. I was in perfect health for 32 years until I suddenly started developing these horrific symptoms. This was about 20 years ago. And I was a pillar of health. I worked out at the gym 6 days a week. I was in phenomenal shape. I was a vegetarian my whole life. I ate impeccably clean and healthy. I had no bad habits. I meditated over an hour twice a day for years. I just had a very healthy lifestyle. I loved being into health and fitness and natural living. And I virtually never had anything worse than just a common cold. And in my early 30s, I was living in Fairfield, Connecticut. And I was 6 weeks away from getting married. And my fiance and I were very anxious to start a family. I had waited my whole life for this. My career was set. My retirement was set. My fiance had a wonderful career. We were just set in our lives and ready to start a family. It was the best time of my life. And I started suddenly developing these bizarre symptoms. I started having trouble sleeping for the first time in my life, like having insomnia and not sleeping well. I lost 10 pounds in less than 2 weeks, and then another 15 pounds in another month or less. I had severe anxiety, this social anxiety and nervous system pain and discomfort started creeping in that was very abnormal. I started having uncontrollable crying spells. My mind was busy, like, just habitual thinking, this, chronic obsessive thinking that was just completely abnormal for me. It's like I didn't have any peace in my mind or in my body. My nervous system was feeling like I was like electrocuted every single second and wouldn't let up. It was just, no peace in my skin, no comfort in my own body. And then I started getting even worse, and I started having horrible, panic attacks. And, I ended up going to the ER several different times. They did all the tests that they thought they should do. They did upper GI series. I had, gut discomfort. I couldn't digest food or eat. They did x-rays, of course, and all sorts of scans, and just said, listen, you're fine. Everything's good. You just need to learn how to handle stress better. Here's some Prozac. Here's a prescription to go see a psychiatrist. You just need to learn how to handle stress better. Well, I told them I never had symptoms like this in my whole life. I didn't have a stressful life at all. I was very happy. I had a wonderful fiance. So, something was wrong with me. But, that's what happens oftentimes when they can't find out what's wrong with you. They'll just give you a prescription for antidepressants and tell you to go see a psychiatrist. So I did take their advice. I went and saw a psychiatrist and saw her just a couple times. She actually said that she thought I had PTSD from a year prior incident that happened where my golden retriever was attacked by a Rottweiler. And, I thought that was really off the mark. I'm like, I really didn't even know what PTSD was. I had never heard of it before, actually. And I later found out that this was just a few months after 9/11, and they were giving that diagnosis out to tons of people in the Northeast, of course. So, I'm like, well, okay, maybe I have PTSD, but, the symptoms didn't get better. I ended up going down to Florida and moved into an investment home that I had that was empty at the time with my mom and my 2 dogs. And I was just expecting to be there a few weeks until I found out what was wrong with me. I thought I might have some weird stomach flu virus or something because, some of the symptoms were in my gut. And I actually was seeing doctors for a year and a half about, doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist, sparing no expense. and with no answers. Every single doctor would take tests and see me and say, listen, you're fine. You just need antidepressants and, go see a psychiatrist. You just have, not dealing with stress well. And even happy stress is stress, literally. That's what I was told. So here I am, 97 pounds. I can eat 4 foods at this point. I have developing, food sensitivities, and I couldn't eat, normal foods that I was able to eat. And I started losing weight, dramatically. I was 97 pounds from a healthy 125 pounds. And my mother had to spoon feed me. I was completely bedridden for this year and a half, except when I could, just barely walk to the car to get in to see the doctor or another hospital visit. And after a year and a half or close to it, I literally planned my death because I was pretty hopeless at this point, and in excruciating suffering, severe insomnia, anxiety, depression, headaches, dizziness, brain fog. I didn't have the brain function, the cognitive skills to even read a book, check the mail, write a check for my bills. Even sounds were just, uncomfortable and painful, actually. Like if my mom just slightly shut the kitchen cupboard, I'd be like, oh, I would just cringe. Like birds chirping out the window would just be so irritating to me. My 2 dogs, a golden retriever and blonde lab that would normally sleep in bed with me every night, I couldn't let them even sleep on the floor in the bedroom with me. Just even their light breathing sometimes would just make me want to crawl under my skin. I had to have them, sleep out in the living room and shut the door. I just couldn't tolerate outside stimulation. I couldn't, sounds, noise. And it was horrible. I was losing my mind and was kind of witnessing myself lose my mind and having no answers for what is wrong with me. I'm a normal, healthy, happy person and my whole life. And all of a sudden I'm in this acute state, and doctors are telling me to go see a psychiatrist and take antidepressants. And, I couldn't explain why all of a sudden I can't eat this food or that food. I'd have more anxiety, or I'd have gut discomfort, or I'd have uncontrollable crying spells if I had spinach or a dark green leafy vegetable. Of course, I understand now why that was, but at the time I certainly didn't. And no doctor understood that. In fact, they looked at me like I was some freak. And, that definitely made them think I'm either hypochondriac, a drama queen, or just making things up for attention. I'm sure that's what most of them thought. And I finally was about to end it, literally. I had it planned. My mom was going to go to the grocery store, as usual, at some point, and I was going to go into my car in the garage, shut the door, and turn the car on. And I had one last ditch effort that I was going to try before ending it. And that was finding actually a chiropractor in Boca Raton, who I just got referred to from a lab that did, great stool tests to test for parasites and microbes in the gut. I thought that maybe I had some bizarre stomach virus. And, I was hoping to God that that's what it was. And I'd have the answer revealed as what's been wrong with me. So I went to see that doctor. Of course, he asked me what's been going on. What are you dealing with? I didn't even want to tell him any of my symptoms. I had been through this for way over a year. None of the doctors could help me. They all looked at me like I was some Fruit Loop. They didn't believe me anyway. And they would all just give me antidepressants, a prescription for antidepressants, and tell me to go see a psychiatrist and say everything's fine with you, after all the lab work and everything else, and everything comes back normal. As usual. And so I said, listen, I just want the stool test. I just want to see if I have parasites or some stomach virus. And he was just so compassionate and kind, actually, with the energy he kind of, gave off. And he just, asked me, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you've been going through and the symptoms you've been dealing with. So I kind of reluctantly told him what I've been going through. And the first thing out of his mouth was, Connie, you sound like you're mercury poisoned. I mean, you have classic symptoms for someone that's mercury toxic. And I said, mercury, what's that? So we figured it out together, and this took a little bit of investigating and him asking me further questions. And he did do a hair analysis test. He sent it to the lab and a stool test. And we, later identified that the symptoms started about 3.5 weeks after I had a dental procedure done when I was still living in Fairfield, Connecticut, called an apic-oectomy. And I'll explain what that is in just a brief moment, but that's definitely a telling thing that happened. When he got the results back from the lab, actually, the vice president of the lab, of Great Smokies Lab in North Carolina, actually called him about a week after they received my sample, my hair analysis test kit, and said, listen, your patient, Connie Fox, is she still alive? Because she has the most mercury. I mean, this is the most mercury toxic person we've ever seen in this lab. And is she still even alive? And that's when he, the chiropractor from Boca, called me immediately and told me what that vice president said and told me I need to come in there and talk to him. So I went in there and talked to him, and he explained to me that I was severely mercury poisoned. My hair analysis test was 10.5 parts per million. Not too long after that, I had a provoked urine test using a DMPS IV, which I'll explain what that is in a few minutes here. That was 140 micrograms of mercury in my urine collection after doing a DMPS chelator, a substance that pulls mercury out from inside the cells and travels through the body, through the bloodstream, of course, to exit through the stool and urine, mostly the urine. And then I did a 6-hour urine collection, and then they tested for heavy metals to see how much I'm excreting to get an accurate level for what levels in the tissue and cells by what I'm excreting via the urine. So those, even to this day, are the highest levels of mercury that I've ever heard, or any of my doctors along the way have ever heard in their entire career. I've actually been documented with several physicians that I was the most mercury toxic person to have survived, and with no remaining symptoms. So let me repeat that, with no remaining symptoms. I'm a medical miracle. I fully recovered. I actually I saw 97 doctors in about 8 years. One of them was able to help me and save my life. And I'm here fully recovered to sit here and share my story with you. And I've actually been helping others that are heavy metal toxic for 14 years now. But I have not told my story for this long. This happened, 20 plus years ago. I don't like doing videos. I've avoided it, and I'm doing it because I feel compelled to share my story at this point, and other videos where I'm going to impart what I have learned from my personal experience, what I've continued to learn ongoing in the last 14 years I've been in private practice, helping the mercury and heavy metal toxic. And I plan on doing a lot of videos and getting this information out there, sharing what I have learned and what's helped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of my clients over the years, and what got me to achieve a full recovery. I owe my recovery to a Dr. Klinghardt, a man that I will forever be grateful to, needless to say. He's renowned as the top doctor in the world for the treatment of mercury toxicity and its related health conditions, such as Parkinson's disease, MS, ALS, autism and autism spectrum disorders, ADD, ADHD, schizophrenia, leaky gut conditions, Lyme disease. I also developed full-blown Lyme disease. That's very common. For those that are more severely heavy metal toxic, it's very common for us also to develop Lyme disease or other Lyme co-infections or other viruses and many other microbes, parasites, dysbiosis, SIBO, mast cell activation syndrome, just leaky gut conditions and gut inflammation issues. Because the metals damage, the intestinal tract and the neurons, the nerve cells in the brain, and really every single cell it comes into contact with. Some of the really most scary and weird symptoms I developed was I started being just in a state of severe fear. I was terrified to be alone. I was afraid I was going to kill myself. And I know that makes no sense. Why would I not just reason not to kill myself then if I was afraid of that? But it was just this abnormal, irrational fear. I had one girlfriend stay with me to help take care of me at the onset of my illness when my mom wasn't there yet. And, just her going to the bathroom, I would follow her and sit on the floor in the hallway outside the bathroom door. I just was, terrified to be alone. And just constant fear and panic attacks and phobia started to develop. I was afraid of the dark for the first time in my life. I was claustrophobic. I became claustrophobic for the first time in my life. I'd have to take a shower with the shower door open, and then later in a different bathroom with the shower curtain completely open. I couldn't have that shut. I couldn't shut the bathroom door when I went in there to use the restroom. Just these bizarre phobias and fears that, I of course never had before. And, trying to explain that to a doctor, they just think you're, crazy. And that was really scary, having these mental and neurological symptoms. My brain function was so impaired, I couldn't function at all. I would, remember what I was talking about. A lot of times talking to my mother, I would forget what I was saying, like halfway in the middle of the sentence and just kind of stop and look, puzzled. And confused because I forgot what I was talking about. I would always make my mom whisper to me. I couldn't stand hearing her even talk at a normal tone because I was so sensitive to noise. It was just horrific. I mean, it was a living nightmare. And when I did find out what was wrong with me, I was, overjoyed. Oh my gosh, okay, we found out I'm mercury poisoned. Now I'm going to be able to get all better and get well soon. Well, that was unfortunately far from the truth. I had no idea what I was in for the next 7 years. I went through, living hell really. Is an understatement, just torture, trying to go through the process, the very complex process of, trying to remove the mercury. Mercury is a neurotoxin and it crosses the blood-brain barrier, that protective blood-brain barrier. And mercury gets stuck, stored, trapped in the cells, intracellularly, all over the body, including in the brain. And literally, virtually stays there forever unless you take certain things and do certain things with that to, pull the mercury out from inside the cells. Now it's going to be traveling through the bloodstream, through the body and out, mostly through the stool and urine, of course. And that can be a very problematic process, especially for someone that's more severely toxic. When I got sick, no one heard of mercury poisoning at that time. At least, a lot of people, have heard of that. They know our seafood's toxic. We've heard of getting, poison with environmental toxins and chemicals and, aluminum and mercury. And it's getting more public awareness than it was when I was sick, that's for sure. But many people really just don't realize how toxic our seafood is, how toxic the environment is, or how that even happens. And, that you can be getting slowly poisoned with mercury for years and years and years, and eventually start developing symptoms. And usually it's actually very subtle at first. And it just starts off with maybe a little more fatigue, mild depression, mild gut issues, mild anxiety, a little social anxiety, starting to feel, an abnormal insecurity or uncomfortability. Outside stimulation becomes a little irritating. Headaches, dizziness, bodily aches and pains, inflammation. Just a whole host of symptoms because, these metals can get stored intracellularly anywhere and everywhere in the body. So where there is a higher concentration in one area, that person will have worse symptoms influencing that organ or gland or bodily system than others. So it really can give a wide variety of bizarre sensations, horrible symptoms, and of course the mental and neurological symptoms are the worst. I mean, they call Mercury toxicity the Mad Hatter's disease for a reason. It literally makes people go mad. It makes people go insane. And that's one thing about mercury that's very unusual, even compared to being poisoned with lead or aluminum or arsenic or cadmium, for example. It really causes the mental and neurological symptoms that are just horrific and terrifying and really a nightmare, a living nightmare. I eventually, of course, found out how I got mercury poisoned, and it was really from a few different sources of exposure, which is typically, it's very common actually. For starters, I was born mercury toxic from one degree or another. My mother had several amalgams fillings in her teeth when she carried me. Amalgam fillings are the silver colored fillings. They contain about 51 to 53% mercury, and they're not stable. They off-gas, they emit methyl mercury vapor. And mercury goes literally two inches away into our brain, nervous system. We inhale it and it goes all over the body systemically. So I was born mercury toxic. Then, of course, as many of us have had, I had the usual infant in childhood. I won't use the bad V word that's not allowed to be said in videos these days, but the shots that we have put in our arm, some are now administered via nasal drops in other ways. But I had those standard infant childhood quote shots. And then when I was a child, I had about 7 or 8 amalgam fillings put in my teeth. So I had those in my teeth for many years, for decades, of course, just slowly poisoning me with mercury. Eventually, when I was in my early 30s, I started eating meat for the first time. Not meat, but fish and seafood. I was actually, as I mentioned, I was born and raised a vegan. I didn't eat any meat or dairy products, but I started eating fish for the first time in my life. So I was a regular seafood eater, fish eater, for close to a year prior to the onset of my symptoms. And, most people just do not realize how toxic our seafood is with mercury, arsenic, lead, chemicals and dioxins. Needless to say, that was over 20 years ago. So now it's much, much worse. But I did eat seafood regularly for close to a year prior to the onset of my symptoms. And really the straw on the camel's back was when I got an apicoectomy. This is a dental procedure that, some say is the most dangerous dental procedure to have done. It's where I had an infected root canal, and they filled the 3 nerve roots. They cleared it out as best as they could. And they filled the 3 nerve roots with amalgam material. It's bad enough being in the tooth, it off gases and emits, mercury vapor. But in the gum, it's really said to be even much worse. It goes directly into all the capillaries. There's, hundreds, actually even thousands of capillaries, microscopic capillaries in the gum that lead directly to the brain, 2 inches away, the nervous system, but also to every artery, every blood vessel. They go directly down into certain organs, glands, or areas of the body, and are constantly, just poisoning the body systemically with the mercury vapor. So I had, realized with the help of the doctor that initially diagnosed me with mercury poisoning, that about 3.5 weeks after I had that apicoectomy is when I started developing the onset of my, very acute symptoms. I started getting, severely ill and having, these bizarre symptoms for the first time. So again, it was really just the straw on the camel's back. I had been, slowly poisoning myself in these different ways, unknowingly, of course, for years, for decades, but still remained non-symptomatic. I mean, eventually we reach our body's toxin burden level and we start developing symptoms. For me, it was very acute and sudden, which can sometimes happen. Oftentimes, it's very, very subtle at first, and oftentimes as young children. They are mercury poison for same reasons that I just mentioned, how I got exposed to as a fetus and an infant, and childhood growing up, what we're exposed to oftentimes. And it's often just very slow and subtle symptoms, start having mild depression, maybe mild fatigue, mild anxiety, mild social anxiety, feeling a little shy or insecure. That's a classic symptom of mercury toxicity, this abnormal feeling of wanting to become more reclusive, insecure, and shy in public settings or around outside stimulation or other people. Gut issues, just a whole host of symptoms start developing one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's usually very subtle and slow and just gradually progresses year after year after year. And when we keep getting more exposure, with our amalgam fillings or another annual, into the arm, or eating seafood. Of course, there's other, environmental toxins that are just so prevalent, especially more and more these days, that are factors involved, whether it's chemicals, metals, it adds up eventually. With mercury, of course, though, it's a different ball game. It, does cross that blood-brain barrier and it stores intracellularly, and it's very hard to get mercury out of the body. It's much, much easier to get lead, arsenic, aluminum, chemicals, much easier to get these other metals or chemicals out of the body, even radiation. Mercury's much, much more complex, to get it, successfully out of the body. But there's many other variables as far as, exposure to chemicals, and that all just adds up as well. There's, toxic candles and air fresheners and exterminators, and non-organic food is very toxic. Most people just don't realize how toxic it is with glyphosate. It's a known carcinogen. Petroleum-based products, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, it's odorless, it's tasteless, it's colorless, same for the mercury vapor. We don't smell it, we don't see it, but it's there. There's aluminum in many deodorants. There's aluminum in many baking powders. There's, many baby lotions and oils contain mercury. Petroleum-based products. Cosmetics are very toxic, many cosmetics. So a lot of personal hygiene products, cologne and perfume is really, really toxic. Just dozens and dozens and dozens of known carcinogens and chemicals in them. So there's, household cleaners. I mean, the list goes on. I could go on for quite a while on that. But there's really a simple way to prevent exposure to 95+% of these common sources of exposure to metals and chemicals. I covered that in just a few page, article on my blog page. I'll list that link down below. It's very important. I keep it very simple. It doesn't have to be too arduous or complicated or overwhelming, but there are some very simple product changes we can make and simple things we can apply into our daily life that really will prevent us from exposure to approximately 95+% of the metals and chemicals and radiation, exposure that's so common and prevalent these modern toxic days. So yes, that's how I got mercury toxic, and how many other people are getting mercury toxic or chemically toxic or aluminum toxic and just don't know it. These bad shots that we get, are many or all are very, very toxic with mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, and or many other toxic substances and neurotoxins. So yeah, we accumulate that every single time we get another one, and eventually it adds up, it catches up with us and starts developing symptoms and health issues and conditions and illnesses and even very serious diseases. So I went through doctor after doctor, specialist after specialist. I saw, dozens and dozens and dozens of doctors trying to get on their recommended program to detoxify the mercury and get better. Well, I did nothing but get worse and worse. And they would all either recommend DMSA, which are pills. It's an oral chelator, or DMPS, which was an intravenous chelator. And a chelator is a substance. It's actually a drug. It's a very toxic, harsh drug that will pull mercury or metals out from within the cell. And now it's traveling through the body to, of course, hopefully travel through the bloodstream, through the detox pathways, and out through, of course, the skin and mostly the urine and stool. And, for those that are more mildly toxic, that can be an okay route to take for some, because they're very mildly toxic. They have mild cellular damage. They have a mild damaged gut. They have mild nutritional deficiencies and mild other imbalances and issues that heavy metal toxicity causes. They can sometimes handle those harsh toxic drugs, and to dump out, pull out, metals, they're not as toxic. And they can remove the metals that way, do okay with that route until they're detoxified, and then move on, with their life. But when we get to be more moderately to severely toxic, it's a completely different ballgame. We need to handle that completely differently. When we're much more toxic, of course, we have a lot more metals in our cells. So if we take a really strong, harsh chelator, such as DMSA or DMPS, to pull out a bunch of metals from within the cells, including the brain, and we have more gut damage, that damaged intestinal mucosal layer gets, that intestinal mucosal layer gets damaged from the metals. Other chemicals, of course, antibiotics damages that, protective buffer. But when that gets damaged, we get a compromised immunity. Then we start getting the overgrowth of pathogens. It starts with candida overgrowth and turns into bad bacteria overgrowth, parasites, and then later on just continues to progress. We get viruses, and now we've got all these microbes, pathogens that are systemic. Sounds kind of icky, but they're in our brain, our organs, our glands, of course, the gut. They harbor around joints, viruses, and can cause, joint injuries, spine issues, by irritating and inflaming joints. So after over 6 years of seeing doctor after doctor, the best doctors available out there. I traveled all over the country. I actually internationally as well. And every single doctor just made me worse. Every practitioner I saw just made me worse. They all recommended DMSA or DMPS, of course, to chelate and remove the mercury. They would recommend the commonly recommended supplements for the heavy metal toxics, such as alpha lipoic acid, MSM, NAC, cilantro drops, chlorella, minerals, and they all just made me worse. I couldn't tolerate any of it. It put me through sheer torture. Every time I chelated, took chlorella, it was a living nightmare. I was severely suicidal every waking moment for years. I think back, I just look back, I don't know how I got through it without ending it. It was literally, I just couldn't bear to think about leaving my 2 dogs and abandoning them. They were my children to me. Of course, my mother, could never handle. It would just be devastating. And I really hung in there for them. I eventually got to see Dr. Klinghardt. I heard about him. There was a long waiting list to see him. And actually, by the time they called me, I was waiting over 1.5 years to get in to see him, desperate every waking moment, for the time I could see him. He was going to be my last hope. And I had almost kind of really stopped seeing doctors at that point because there was no one else left to see. I had already seen them all, and no one could help me anyway. Many doctors would just say, listen, they would drop me as a patient, say, listen, I can't even keep you as a patient. You're likely going to have organ damage, brain damage, or die. You're a risk to us. They wouldn't even refer me to anyone. I even had one doctor say, I can't refer you to any of my friends. You're such a risk for a lawsuit. Just go home and get your things in order, get your affairs in order and a will and so forth. We can't help you. It was just horrific. And I was hopeless, in a state of complete hopelessness, and just being tortured still every waking moment, and severe pain and agony, mentally, physically, and it was just no relief. And I eventually got a phone call from Dr. Klinghart's office that they were going to be able to get me in a couple of weeks. And I literally actually told him, I said, well, never mind, because I had it on my calendar. It was just a few days away. I was going to kill myself. This same thing in the garage. And turn on the car, sit in the car, turn on the car in the garage, and end that. And I had given up hope really at that point, and I couldn't even, I just knew Dr. Klinghardt wasn't even going to be able to help me. And then, a friend actually really talked me into going and said that he would go with me and help me. Even the flight out there from South Florida to Seattle was overwhelming. I didn't even know how I could handle that physically. I was in such bad shape and, debilitated. And, to be in an airport and have to sit up and be around tons of people and noises. I mean, it was just like impossible to even think about going. But, a friend talked me into going and said, listen, you have got to go. You've been waiting over 1.5 years for this. He might be able to help you. And so I called them back about a half hour later and I said, listen, I'd still like to keep that appointment if you haven't given it away already. And they gave it to me. So I went up and saw Dr. Klinghardt, and the first appointment with him, my first consultation with him, he answered all of my questions. I couldn't believe it, that he understood everything of what was going on with me. He even said also, are you a vegetarian? Because if you are, you're probably not going to make it, because this condition, mercury toxicity, on my level is what, especially, need to eat a lot of eggs and red meat. And it's ironic because I had been a vegan, born and raised a vegan, until I got ill. And while I was ill, I suddenly started becoming ravenous for eggs and red meat. My mom thought I lost my marbles, literally. And I was craving cheeseburgers, steak, bacon, and eggs all the time. And I just thought that was crazy too. I mean, normally that would even just gross me out. Even looking at meat or eggs, I just never ate it. I was just raised that way. And I was eating red meat 3 days a week, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And eggs, I was having 3 soft poached eggs 3 times a day, 7 days a week for, 3-4 years. But it's just amazing how my body knew what I needed to survive and started craving that. And that was just unexplainable until Dr. Klinghardt said that to me, my first consult. But, he also told me I had full-blown Lyme. And I said, oh, I got Lyme when I was in Fairfield, Connecticut. And actually, a doctor gave me antibiotics for 2 weeks and said that resolved it. And little did I understand the connection between Lyme disease and heavy metal toxicity. But I definitely had Lyme and severe parasites and dysbiosis and mast cell activation syndrome. I had, severely impaired assimilation and methylation, and, severe food sensitivities. I had, severe deficiencies in neurotransmitter production, and hormones were very imbalanced. I had a severe hypothyroid condition, which is common for more severely mercury toxic cases, often develop a hypothyroid condition. I had severe nutritional deficiencies, which heavy metal toxicity causes, and, other complications and issues. And I ended up getting better and better under Dr. Klinghardt's care. And he told me upon my first visit, he told me to never, and sometimes he does recommend DMSA or DMPS, but that's not for everyone. And he told me to never touch chlorella or cilantro. No, excuse me, not cilantro, chlorella or DMSA or DMPS ever again. And I never did. And I fully detoxified with specific nutrients and heavy metal detoxifiers. Heavy metal detoxifiers are like chelators, but they're natural substances. So they do pull metals out from within the cells, like a chelator does, but they're not toxic in and of themselves. They're not a synthetic drug. And of course, they're much safer. It's much more gentle. And there are certain nutrients that if you get in simultaneously, meaning daily, act like a natural chelator. Of course, they get into the cells and they help expel, stored intracellular toxins. So I went through, seeing Dr. Klinghardt definitely way over a dozen times, and eventually achieved a full recovery. And I actually I was so compelled to share what I had learned with others. And I really realized that there were so many people out there. I guess my story was actually written in the DAMS newsletter. It's Dental Amalgam Mercury Solutions, a non-for-profit organization that offers just some wonderful, very helpful information for mercury toxic victims. And my story was actually printed in their newsletter. I think it was 2007, I believe. And I was almost fully recovered, not quite. I had another year before I was fully recovered, but I was much better. And I started having a lot of people contact me from that and asking me a lot of questions. And I started realizing how little that they knew. And I just started sharing with them what I had learned and what got me better with this, or, problems that they were having. I would share what I did because I had the same, issues. And I started really helping people. And it really just led to me realizing, I can't get back into commercial real estate, what I did before. I have to help these people. There's so many people out there. I thought it was just, a fluke thing that I got it, but there's so many people out there suffering with mercury and heavy metal toxicity and coping with symptoms, and seeing urologists, gynecologists, immunologists, functional medicine physicians, psychiatrists, gastrointestinal physicians. Just seeing doctor after doctor to try to help this symptom and that symptom. They have no idea that they've been slowly poisoning themselves with mercury or aluminum or, even chemicals, of course, in our modern toxic environment. So I actually went back to school and got my license as a holistic health practitioner so I can impart what I learned. And I've been doing that for 14 years now, since 2008. And I am really excited about just sharing my story now for the first time publicly. And I am going to be sharing a lot of educational videos and imparting what I learned. Unfortunately, this knowledge is not taught in medical or dental school still. And it's really hard to find the right help. It's not in schools out there. So, of course, I learned what I learned through my very unfortunate experience, which cost me $1.7 million in over 8 years of my life lost in absolute agony, isolation, and suffering. I spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of just medical expenses that my health insurance wouldn't cover. And I had the best health insurance that you could get. It paid for extremely little. In fact, about $1 million of medical expenses, it paid for less than $5,000 of them. That's how little it covered for this condition. And of course, I had to live off my savings for all those years. So it was massive expenses. And thank God I had that money saved, or I certainly wouldn't be here today. But I'm very happy to share my story. I'm happy to get it out there, and I'm really excited to be sharing a lot more educational videos with you and sharing what I had learned and what I continue to learn in my private practice from my clients ongoing, working with the heavy metal toxics. So you'll be getting seeing a lot more videos if you'd like, learning about, how do you handle these symptoms? How do you handle this condition or this issue or this obstacle you're running into? How do you properly test for it accurately? And everything you need to know about this condition of mercury and heavy metal toxicity, including chemical toxicity. A lot of people are recognizing more and more how the environment's just getting more and more toxic, and more people are having health issues and infertility and horrible symptoms that, weren't around 10, 20 plus years ago. Or it was very rare and is becoming very, very common now these days. So yes, we need this information, and I'm really excited to be getting it out here finally on a more public level here on YouTube. So I will be sharing more videos soon with great information that's helpful and help guide you along the way here if you're dealing with any of these symptoms. So I look forward to speaking with you again, and thanks for listening. And if you know of anyone that is dealing with unexplainable symptoms of any kind, please share this video with them. So many people are dealing with this and just don't know that they are heavy metal toxic, and it can help a lot of people, because there are unfortunately millions of people out there heavy metal toxic and they just don't know it. They don't know that's the underlying culprit of their issues. And this knowledge is not taught in schools yet in America, unfortunately. So it's hard to get this information. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you again soon.